Erin Riley, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm blanking on who introduced us, but as soon as I saw what you do, I was like, I want to have this conversation. So, what do you do?
Well, I think it was Sweet Michelle Olander from Veg Your Best who connected
Ah,
us.
bingo, right.
Thanks, Kurt.
I apologize, Michelle, if you're listening.
We'll get her in there. And yeah, what I do is vegan garden fertilizer. So when I have a vegetable gardening business, it's a landscaping company, but I specialize in edible landscaping. And so I use a lot
Okay.
of garden fertilizer. And as my business expanded, I started ordering it in bulk so I could mix it myself, right? Mostly actually just to save money was the first thought. And then I thought, oh, I could sort of play with the inputs and play with the nutrition values at different times of the year or for different kinds of vegetables. So I kind of really got into like specialty fertilizers. And it's all organic, right? So these are all like natural inputs. But some of the natural traditional inputs for garden fertilizer, well, not some, almost all are animal byproducts. And I didn't think very much of it. Blood meal, bone meal, poultry meal, fish meal. I didn't think too much about it. It's so ingrained in organic gardening. That's what everybody uses.
Yeah.
And over time, just actually like handling these materials, it just made me question where they came from, and how would blood meal even be organic? Just like from the beginning, I didn't understand. And the more I looked, oh, the worse it got.
Okay, so this is, I'm happy to say that, I haven't gardened since last summer, and we moved, we sold our house, we sold
Oh
our
yeah.
big three quarter of an acre garden, but I honestly never thought about it. Like I knew that, okay, well, Pete's or Daddy Pete or whatever has like, manure. And I figure, we were in a rural area, like, yeah, the cows ended up, not in a good place. But the horses were fine and the chickens pooped and, someone just like walked behind them with a smile and a shovel. And like, honestly, blood meal, bone meal, feather meal didn't really occur to me as it's like meal, you know,
Right.
like cereal.
Perfect example. Yes. And the language they use is extremely misleading. And you're right. The word meal in and of itself kind of makes it sound wholesome.
Okay, so I'm really happy that I'm not in the middle of like having to like go out in the backyard and like look at the carnage that's represented by these big bags.
Yeah.
What did you find out when you looked and at like the origins?
So when I was, again, one of the things, I'm like a big organic advocate, a big advocate for organic gardening. And so that was my point of view, I think, at first. Like, how is this organic? Organics should be regulated, which of course they are. There's all this certification process. And if you're a gardener, you might be familiar with OMRI, OMRI, and they're a big
Yeah.
international organic certifier, and their presence and their little label that you can put on your bag was supposed to mean something, like the highest level of organic integrity. And so when I looked on their website and I saw that, like, for example, the bone meal was sourced from Foster Farms, I was like, I don't understand, like, Foster Farms, like, they're one of the worst. I mean, they're the biggest chicken producer there is. And the list of problems, the bad work environment, the overuse of water, the neglect and the violence at their slaughterhouses. I don't understand how that's the source of organic bone meal or poultry meal. That just didn't make sense to me. So I just started researching that, and it took me years to understand these connections because they're completely hidden. This, if it's supposed to be this organic credentialed thing, I would think being transparent would just go hand in hand with that. But nothing
Sure.
was transparent. You Organic pet food is like more organic than organic garden fertilizer. It's more regulated. They make sure that
Hmm.
organic pet food does come from organic meat sources where organic fertilizer, that doesn't come from organic birds, doesn't come from organic cows. It doesn't come, it's,
It just means non-synthetic, like it wasn't
yeah,
produced chemically in a lab.
yeah. Unfortunately,
Right?
that's
It's
like
organic. It's organic the way organic means something that was once alive.
correct. Absolutely, yeah. Which is a very broad definition, right? I think people would assume it means something a little more specific than that.
Hmm. So I'm trying to imagine. So, like, let's say we stop this interview right here, and we have me with like all my questions, and then the listeners with all their questions, and they're like, "Well, I want to find out what's going on, even though things are very opaque." Like, could you take us through your sleuthing process? So that like we could sort of vicariously follow you and not just like take your word for it.
Yes. So they're one of the linchpins of the whole thing was discovering there's an industry called rendering. And when they might talk about, like, you might think of euthanasia, like if you put an animal down or something like that. But this is rendering is really just a big sort of cesspool of all kinds of animals in all kinds of states that just gets grinded, melted, boiled, and ground into different products. But rendering is the industry. In fact, they call rendering the quiet industry. And
Hmm.
they've been trying to rebrand themselves as recyclers and upcyclers, which is just ludicrous. They've sort of spin a tale that um, these products from these animals are waste products. And so people think, oh, well, that does sound like recycling, right? That must be like, that's how indigenous people did it. They used the
Yes, yeah, the
whole,
whole buffalo.
yeah. And this is not that. That is obviously cultural appropriation, one, and two, awful amounts of greenwashing, because that is not what's happening. This is expired meat. This is downers, which are animals that are alive, are dead or dying, diseased animals, roadkill, any manner of animal, certainly horses, get rendered down into these products. Yeah. So also not traceable. None of that. How would you source or know where any of that came from? They don't. In fact, in our country, in America, they did this thing where they were supposed to put on meat what the country of origin was. It was called the Cool Law, COOL. And people voted, yeah, they absolutely wanted to know the country of origin. Like when you picked up your, you picked up your meat and it's on that tray now. Here, all the meat is on a tray and plastic wrapped, already cut. There's no
Uh-huh.
butchers anymore in grocery stores. There's no little butchers. And so you get this meat, and when that meat expires, the shelves are just full of this meat too. Don't you ever wonder, you go and you think, who buys all this? How's this stuff last?
Yeah.
They know that this stuff's going to expire. They have a plan for it later. So it's not like it's waste and they are turning, oh my gosh, we're drowning in waste products from feeding people. No, they're growing animals for these byproducts. The rendering industry is actually bigger than the meat industry. Do you know what I mean? Because,
Yeah.
yeah, because they
Yeah. So
can,
you're saying that if it was actually just waste, if the supermarkets were buying just enough that they knew by the end of the day that everything that was going to expire to a very close margin of error was sold, there would be X amount of product. But because of rendering, they can be 3 or 4X, and it just looks like it's waste, but it's planned from the very beginning that this stuff, and if it's going to waste, it doesn't have to be that high quality, and we can have an industry that is okay with whatever downer rate. I don't know what the rates are of how many animals don't make it to slaughter.
right?
Um,
Yeah. There's
so
when
so
yeah, because the waste goes like into leather. The leather industry is not dependent on just a random amount of waste that comes every year. They grow for leather. They
hmm,
grow for cosmetics. The cosmetic industry is huge. It takes so much animal products. The oils, they press it all down. They make this oil that's almost in almost all cosmetics. That industry is not just waiting around unsure of what their raw materials are going to be. They know damn well what their raw materials are going to be.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, there's people aren't going to TGI Fridays as much. We're going to have to make
Yeah,
smaller belts.
exactly. Yes, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, so you found out about rendering, and then you traced the bone meal back to this Foster Farms. Um, so, and you're saying like organic has these like multiple meanings. Where if I'm buying organic meat, if I'm buying organic chicken,
Yeah.
I expect, I don't know, that the chicken was not given antibiotics,
Right.
was
Those are the
fed
laws.
or
Yeah, you're right. Those are the laws. No antibiotics. There are laws for an organic chicken,
yeah,
but there's
and
no law for
the chicken was fed organic
right.
grain or
It
whatever,
was
right?
yeah. It should be yeah.
Okay, but the organic fertilizer that comes like tell me about the chickens. Like if I were to eat a chicken from Foster Farm, am I getting antibiotic free, organic grain fed chicken?
Well, that's the thing. So when I looked into foster farms, just their own history, and there's all these banned antibiotics was one of the things found in the bone meal from foster farms. Banned antibiotics, nonetheless, any antibiotic. These are
Hmm.
disease resistant. I mean, yeah, bacteria, antibiotic resistant bacteria, and it's passing down through the fertilizer. So yeah, and
Gotcha.
I mean the
And
bone meal all just goes together. Just because that person's sourcing their bone meal from Foster Farms, where is all the other bone meal coming from? When now that they butcher they'll butcher like in a warehouse. It's like they're processing weed or something. Everything. Once you see how they process
hmm,
salad, those lettuce bags, by the way, you would never buy another lettuce bag of lettuce. But these pictures of these giant places and all night, they're just butchering because then the companies, the meat industry, the rendering industry can keep all the bones. They no longer, it's not going in the trash anymore. Women aren't, your grandma's not boiling that down into soup like we used to. So before you even get the meat, they're like, if you don't mind, we're just going to take these byproducts out so you don't even have to be bothered. But they have a nice
hmm.
central location now.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Like all
And
these,
and
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and just in case Foster Farms sees this interview and wants to sue me, is there documentation about all these claims?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. These are all in periodicals that I read. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. I
good,
mean,
good
it's
to
a whole
know.
industry. I wouldn't pick on foster farms. The only other thing I would actually pick on foster farms about while we're here is because we're talking about like organic, right? And what pisses me off is that all of the hard work that has gone on for generations to create organic, this idea that you care about larger ecosystems, you care about the environment as you're making your food, that it's thoughtful, all these things. They're borrowing all of that, co-opting all that goodwill and turning it
Yeah,
into something else. And one of the ways I've found that they do this is through trademarking. So they trademark words so other people can't use them. And Foster Farms has trademarked the word organic farm. Well, why would you need to do that? Why? Like you can trademark the word foster farm all day. How you trademark the word organic farm? How did the government give? I'm confused. I'm just confused. It doesn't make sense to me. When I started my company, I was, trying to name it. And I initially named it Stewards. I thought that was kind of a cute play on words, stewarding the land. And then our mascot was a little cat called Stewie. And, I got the trademark, went through all the rigmarole, had a lawyer, got the trademark. And then I was sued for the trademark because, just because the government says, hey, we agree with you, you can have this trademark and you pay for it. If somebody else says, I disagree, I think she's infringing on my trademark, they can sue you. And so I got this thing, 6 lawyers signed to it to say, stop using the word stewards. And it was a pesticide company in Texas. They just
oh
trademark
wow,
it to take it out of the lexicon. So they own it. Do you know what I mean? They take the word organic farm out of the lexicon and trademark it so no one else can claim to have an organic farm. That's that's odd. That seems like overreach to me.
It seems like it's a good strategy for lawyers to keep high billables.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. So Foster Farms, for some reason, owns the trademark to the word organic farm. And as I'm sure I mean, there's no farm at Foster Farms. They're called, they're confined animal feeding operations,
Yeah,
CAFO.
yeah,
And, earlier too, you mentioned like manure. And there's a beautiful book called Pastoral Song. James Rebanks is the author. And it's about the change in farming. And this is very recent. This is the last 50 years. I'm sounding alarm because things are changing very quickly in our ecology and how we grow food. And everyone should be very concerned about that, right? So James Rebanks was like, his family were old timey farmers in England. And over in the 70s, when they came out with synthetic fertilizers, all these chemical fertilizers, and just kind of mechanized farming, right? So instead of like a farmer walking behind cattle, for example, pulling a plow, and the cattle is pooping right there in the field, and the farmer grows the alfalfa himself, he grows his own feed for his own cattle, right? It's
hmm
very responsible. You can see there's a personal responsibility and connection the whole way through the process. Then in the 70s, they decided, screw that, and they wanted to use big tractors, right? The bigger, the better. And so they had to kind of flatten everything. They had to remove all the trees. In England, they use like hedgerows. They
yeah,
create these hedgerows. They got rid of all of those because the tractors can't move around. They can't spin around a stupid hedgerow. So they ended up then removing animals from the animal agriculture, right? So now we're doing monocrops, and the animals don't live on farms. They now live in CAFOs, confined. So they're not grazing, right? So they're not eating hay and alfalfa, as I'm sure in the last couple decades, the meals we're talking about, when they render the animals down, that becomes fertilizer, but also becomes feedstock, right? It becomes food for other animals. That's how
uh-huh.
BSE got spread, was they fed cows to cows.
Meaning
So
mad cow disease,
that's right.
BSE.
So they stopped feeding cows to cows, allegedly. Doesn't mean we're not eating the cows though. But anyway, sprinkled on our fertilizer, on our vegetables. So they feed these feeds to animals. So the animals aren't grazing. They're not eating alfalfa and hay. They're eating just these meals. So they no longer poop. They don't poop of poop. It's not a road apple, unfortunately. It's like
hmm
a toxic, thin stream because their bodies can't process, right? There's nothing to bind it, the poor things.
Yeah.
That's why now when you see aerial photos of like these big factory farms, there's these lagoons, these pits, right? And they're covered. You see, what are those? I mean, those weren't around when I had a farm. I grew up in a farming community. Nobody had giant pits of this stuff, but now they do because the animals don't make manure anymore. So now they have a whole other problem: what to do with these giant pits that smell terrible, as you might imagine. So one of the things they figured out to do is to cover them with a tarp, and they catch the methane and they make that into biofuel. Right now,
Okay.
again, I think we're making biofuel sound like a great thing when in fact it's not. But anyway, I'm sure it can still power something. So they take the methane off, but there's still stuff left at the bottom after the methane's taken off. That is made into fertilizer, organic fertilizer. I'm just confused. What kind of ecology where we're feeding animals to animals over and over again, and you also want that byproduct on our food? Does that sound right?
Mm. It reminds me of I don't know if you're familiar with the Yes Men.
No? I have my little
It's
notebook here.
a they're activists, and
Yeah.
what their shtick was, they would try to impersonate organizations and corporations, but tell the truth.
Okay.
Right. So like I think you might have heard about this one. They pretended to be from the chemical company, Union Carbide, that had that terrible accident in Bhopal, India, and they'd created a fake website for Union Carbide, like, spelled something wrong, but the press got on them and they were on BBC, and they announced that they were going to, billions of dollars of reparations. Union Carbide's stock tanked so badly that they ended up getting bought out by Dow. Right. So the thing I'm thinking of is they were invited to some, like, the future of food, and they were like these scientists from the World Bank, I think, or International Monetary Fund, and their idea was basically making hamburgers from first world poop and serving it to, and then that poop would get, like, down the line, and that somebody, like the poorest person in the world, is eating, like, a hamburger made of poop that's been recycled 7 times. And the funny thing, like, it was, videotaped. The funny thing was, like, a lot of the policy wonks are, like, trying to figure out, like, could that work? And then, just a few people were like, this is outrageous. But just like what you're saying is, like, we've got these, like, I'm picturing, like, a hellscape of Mars or Venus, like this totally inhospitable piece of land where we have to trap the gases and try to do something useful with them so they don't end up causing, like, irreparable climate harm. And then the shit underneath is what we're going to grow our food in. This is pretty awful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really awful. I'm actually shocked. I was shocked. I kept going down the wormhole, I mean, just over and over and over again. I just couldn't believe it. All the stuff I was finding out. Yeah, it's really, really concerning. And, I always say, I think the only thing, it's a miracle no one's gotten sick yet. Like COVID and BSE, we become too infiltrated to the wildness of nature. We are infringing to a degree that we have no concept. They say, of course, the next big flu is going to come from farms. The next COVID will come from a farm, and they're not farms. Let's just the CAFOs.
Yeah.
It's just wrong.
I keep hearing about, recalls of lettuce or spinach, and so I'm thinking, oh, greens. There must be a problem with greens. Isn't that the fertilizer that's going on the greens?
So salmonella and the E. coli come directly from the poop. And what's causing that is that at these CFOs or wherever, when the waste leaks into groundwater or streams or lakes, and then that water gets used to rinse vegetables. So that's where that's coming from. The water they're using to clean or irrigate the plants in the fields are downstream, are polluted. Mm-hmm. So, that's where that comes from. Or if they're using some kind of manure product, it has that on it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that comes straight from some kind of contaminated water usually.
So what I heard you describing when you're talking about the pastoral song was a cycle, right? Where everything is connected. And what you're describing is this: once the cycle is broken, then we have 2 problems, right? We have soil without nutrients, and we have waste without containment.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we're catching some terrible disease from our fertilizer or the food. Because, it's not just, I'm making a product for the home gardener because home gardens are my jam, and little urban agriculture situations, community gardens, school gardens, that's my jam. And I want to keep those people safe. One of the beauties of home gardens is, we can't have too much of an impact on agriculture. Unfortunately, you and I sitting here, but you can't have an impact if you grow at home, right? Your garden at home that's the whole point, is that control you get to have over it. Well, if you're assuming you're putting something great on it and it turns out you're just buying into everything else that's happening, that's a big problem for me. So I'm addressing the home gardener with what I'm doing. But on a larger scale, I think we need to start talking about, making demands about what organic labeling and values really are, and pressuring the government. When, like I was saying, they passed this cool law, the COOL here, and people said, yes, we want to know the country of origin of our meat. We want a sticker on the container. Well, the lobbyists got in there and the industry people got in there and they talked to the government. They're like, we're not going to do it. And they're like, you don't have to. And I mean, I found the
Mm.
Congress. It's in Congress. It says right there. Them just saying, you made your point, meat industry. It's too expensive to put those labels on it and you don't have to do it. Well, how do we even know that happened? Where are, like, I don't know. Is this hidden? Is no one reading these things? Because there's so many organic advocates out there. I don't know. Maybe they're just getting much better at hiding it. Or maybe for some reason I just clicked on the right websites, to spread the word. But if we don't even know the country of origin of the expired meat, how is it organic? You don't even know what country it came from. We have BSE still here in America, livestock mad cow disease. And I was reading, they were taught, of course, like the USDA was saying it's no problem. These people in America who got BSE got it because they were in other countries. This is unbelievable. So of course, just blame other countries. So they said this kid who got BSE spent his childhood in Saudi Arabia and was only in Virginia for a few years, So obviously he got it when he was in Saudi Arabia. And one of the fertilizers I found that is certified organic in this country is a horn and hoof meal from Saudi Arabia. I'm so sorry. If we're blaming BSE in this country because this kid lived in Saudi Arabia, why are we importing organic fertilizer? And it's called horn and hoof meal. They're not even hiding it. It's just, right? It's bonkers.
Yeah. Well, alliteration is good for marketing. So
that's right. Horn and hoof meal. Yes. In fact, their slogan is "Be the Lion." I'm like, no. Oh my God, no.
Now, but you talk about like the health risks, but like home gardeners are not routinely getting sick from their tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and eggplant and strawberries, are they? Like what's so I can see that there's a huge sort of ethical concern for people who want to be vegan or who don't want to support animal cruelty. But is there actually a health risk? I mean, aren't these products like boiled or incinerated or fumigated or something to make sure that they're not just these pulsing bags of pathogen?
Yeah, they are sterile in that sense. But the Sierra Club did a test of fertilizer and found forever chemicals, in the fertilizer. So it's not like they're testing for those things. And I just think it's, isn't that, what was that called? Like the fourth turning? Remember that? I just feel like we never know. We never saw COVID coming. We never know when we're right around the corner from something,
Yeah.
It all of a sudden is here and all of us don't know where it came from. I think it's just I would just use the word yet. No one's gotten sick yet. But I think we're right there. And isn't it every time we recycle these products, we just never know what the marker is going to be when we just keep recycling and recycling. Maybe we're ahead of the curve right now, but I wouldn't want to use it. Just the threat of mad cow alone should be enough, I think, to scare people off of it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, I mean, the synthetic fertilizer industry has trained us that there's only three numbers that matter in a fertilizer, right? So it doesn't really matter where it comes from, whether it was synthesized from ammonium nitrate or whether it comes from a badly treated cow that ate its grandmother. There's still, it's like nitrogen, potassium, the other one, phosphorus.
Yeah.
Like for your experience, I imagine as an organic farmer, you look at soil and nutrients from not such a reductionist point of view. Can you talk about like what goes in? What is important to know about what's in fertilizer?
I would love to talk about that. So yeah, like you said, the three numbers in the bag, NPK, and that's sort of what makes a fertilizer as opposed to compost or soil amendment or something, or worm castings. The fertilizer has to be guaranteed. So like as someone making fertilizer, I actually have a license and I am the guarantor of the numbers on that bag. I have the labs to prove it, etc. So that's what those numbers mean. And the big three macronutrients plant needs: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And they would add calcium. Calcium's really like the secret fourth ingredient you need. The beauty of, pardon me, what would be natural and organic gardening is they do care about the micronutrients. So when you make macronutrients in a lab, you can pull out that nitrogen and you can make it as big or small as you want. You can do whatever you want. It's man-made. And that's why they get big numbers. So synthetic fertilizers, 10, 10, 10, 20, 20, 20, 30, 30, 30. You can never get that number with a natural fertilizer because natural ingredients come in at their own number. I'm a piece of algae from this country and I'm a
Uh-huh.
7. You can't
Right.
make it more or less. And so the bags, those numbers on the bags represent the percentage of that nutrient in the bag because natural products bring their own bulk as well, right? They bring their own weight. Like my nitrogen comes from soybean and it's fluffy as hell. So it weighs almost nothing. My rock
Uh-huh.
phosphate comes from a mineral. It's heavy as hell. Do you know what I mean? They're different natural ingredients and they come with their own stories and ingredients and histories and chemical properties.
Yeah.
So
Well, this
the
this sounds exactly like, nutrition. Like if you're
yeah,
trying to, like how much vitamin A is in that red pepper? I don't know where did it grow? What part of the tree did it grow on? When was it harvested?
yeah,
No, no, there's no way to know. But if you get a good mix of everything, you're probably fine.
yeah. And like my rock phosphate brings in calcium and my kelp brings in boron. So when you're using a quality natural ingredient, it automatically has micronutrients in it because it's already a plant or a mineral in and of itself. It's not a single ingredient. That's why the nitrogen and can be so high, say in the synthetic fertilizer, because there's
Uh
no other
huh.
space to take up. So we're looking more like 4-3-2 or 2-3-1. But that's okay because all those other micronutrients are very important for the plant. There's actually something called Liebig's law, and he was a German guy. He also invented the bouillon cube, and he's like the father of organic fertilizer. But his law said that you can't, plants can't survive on a single ingredient. All just like us, all of our nutrition has to be at a certain balanced level. If one piece of nutrition is gone, like you don't have sulfur or something, the whole thing tanks. All the nutrition runs out of the bucket. So all of the little parts of the bucket are all the different nutrition values, and they all have to hold in the plant nutrition. So you can't just do a single, unit. So that's the problem with fertilizing with chemicals, right? You're basically doing that. You don't know what the boron is. You don't know what sulfur is. You don't know what the molybdenum is. But when you're using organic natural products, all of those things are generally coming along with the product. And then I also add, because we're about the soil, like you said, this regenerative agriculture movement is awesome, right? We found we can store carbon in soil, right? If we have healthy soil, the microbes will do that for us. Thank you very much. So we add humic acid, fulvic acid, and beneficial mycorrhiza already in the fertilizer. So it's actually really good for the soil as well as the plant. Because that's the thing, right? We're sort of feeding the soil as much as the plant.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So a lot of the regenerative animal agriculture people talk about, I'm a grass farmer.
Yeah.
Right, like that's my main crop, and then everything else has to depend on the quality of the health of the grass. Um,
Yeah.
so you mentioned like mycorrhiza and humic acid. So let's dive into those a little bit because I don't think most people think of those things. So basically, in my world of talking about food, we're talking a lot in the last decade or so about the microbiome, right?
Yeah.
That you really want this diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there has been, I think, in gardening and in farming, this fear of anything potentially pathogenic, like no bugs, no fungus, no bacteria. Like we want to just do everything in like this sterile substrate where we have total control. Like I don't know whether hydroponic does that or other forms, but you're talking about like a lot of messy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely have the ooh factor, ick factor when it comes to gardening. You have to be tough. But yeah, so soil, you don't want your soil to be sterile. I mean, there's only so much nutrition a plant can, there's only so nutritious the plant we're going to eat can be. It's informed by the soil, and again, like even hydroponics, they have to feed that water, right? In fact, one of my, the formulas I have is a soluble fertilizer that can be used in hydroponics. and because they need to deliver that nutrition as well. And they also want to use organic. You don't want this synthetic carrot, right? No one wants that. So we want soil to be alive. And in general, that is a micro and a macro situation. So earthworms, for example, being like macro life, and then microbial life being something we can't even see. So
Mhm.
if the soil you get in a bag from the store is sterile, thank God. If you opened it, like you said, it would be like a hot mess growing in there. So when you get that sterile soil home from the store, you need to amend it with compost, and compost is what's alive. That's how we run things. Because I do a lot of new gardens. We got to start somewhere. So you get your potting soil, which is generally dead, and then you're going to add the compost, which is alive. And so the ways in which compost is alive is that when you take the brown material, right, your yard waste or cardboard or whatever you have access to, and then you introduce your green waste, which is generally your kitchen scraps, and maybe, grass if you have grass. And you mix those two things together. The green stuff is called green because it breaks down very quickly, right? Like if you left a banana peel out on the counter, right? It decomposes very fast. As opposed to a leaf, you could literally make it a decoration in your house. It would choose to
Yeah.
break down over time. So you have something slowly breaking down and something breaks down fast. And those two things come together, and it slows down this process and it speeds up that process. And somehow, in a way I don't quite understand, that's life. That is how life begins, right? With the bacteria and the fungus, like you said, because those are two different operations that start breaking those things down. Boom, life is there. And then when you keep adding those scraps, the stuff they break down actually becomes compost. But the life is still there. All that microscopic life is still there. And then I build my compost bins on the ground, or you can introduce worms to your compost bin just so you get that extra level. Worms excrete a bacteria that is great for the soil. And if you have healthy soil, you're going to have healthy plants. That's what it's going to grow in, and it's going to come on up. And then my fertilizers give it a boost. So those microorganisms really love fulvic acid and humic acid. It creates, again, more of that digestion, which is life. And in fact, the rendering plants, when they do this in rendering, there's also something called anaerobic digesters. It's what they use to recycle our waste, human waste. That's
Mm.
something else they're trying to do, right? Is use our waste and make it also into compost we use on our vegetables. I'm not so sure. That's called biosolids, and that's also not good. That also has forever chemicals in it. But they're called anaerobic digesters. And that's what a composter is. It's a digester, right? It's digesting all of this stuff. And that's the life in it, which is really actually quite amazing. Because that's all how the life, who knows where it comes from. But somehow in that process, it actually creates life. And
Mm.
life in your soil is the thing you want.
Yeah. So after I read, I think Elaine Incombe's book, Teeming with
Yeah.
Microbes, I started doing compost tea,
Hmm.
which was I think I just went to the woods and got like the so like two shovelfuls of soil that had been least affected by humans, put it in a big rain barrel, filled it with water, added some sugar. I think it was like molasses, and then humic
Yeah.
acid, and then just put a bubbler through it for like 2 days, and then sprayed it on all the plants. How does that fit in to organic gardening?
Yeah, that's the best. I love teas. Liquid fertilizer is so great for plants because it's absorbed so quickly, right? It doesn't have to dissolve in the soil. And that's why I have a soluble version too. So you can just add water to it and boom, you're ready to go. And like you said, the good thing about the tea is you're using that bubbler. So the bubbler is sending oxygen to the microbes, because like
Hmm.
your composter can't become too compact. You would never like seal it in an airtight container. It needs air to breathe and it needs water to drink. And you're giving it that. And then you're adding the food, so you're adding some extra sugar for those microbes to grow. And, molasses is great. I love using molasses in my compost teas. And so, yeah, and that whole water then is teeming with that life. You gave it a huge boom, and it's just like, it's so great. And then you have to use it quickly. You have to use it within like 8 hours. I mean, you should use it immediately if possible. Because as soon as the air stops, the microbes start dying.
Hmm. But you said like the a lot of the compost is formed by anaerobic, which means without oxygen.
That's what those things are. When they build these man-made digesters, yeah, they're
Uh-huh.
anaerobic. I don't, that's about as far as my my inner workings of the anaerobic digesters, but that's what they're called. They must put them under some kind of pressure or heat,
Uh-huh.
to
Well, I
make
do
all that.
know that, I had a compost pile that I neglected for a while and it rained a lot. And then, it's like you stick the pitchfork in and like an inch is like 35 pounds of glop. And the minute you lift it up, you smell sort of that sewer stink, which I think is the anaerobic bacteria.
Yeah, yeah. The sulfur gets
Mhm.
really going at that point. Yeah, and you get that bad
Mhm.
smell. You got to go fix it.
Okay.
I know. I always have to. If we're having huge rains, I like to throw a tarp over my compost, so it doesn't get sodden. Yeah, because like you said, you suffocate it. Then you're suffocating the microbes, and they're not doing their work. Yeah,
Mm.
we're not doing it working the way we like.
Yeah. All right. So I'm thinking about all the home gardeners who are, you know, scared out of their minds now listening to you.
Yeah,
So there's two things they can do, right? One is to order from you, and I don't know if you ship nationally, internationally, if it's even, environmentally responsible to send, your a bag of your stuff to Boston or Charleston. So I'd love to hear about like who you serve, and then for people for whom that's not easy or possible, like what we can do to not maintain our dependence on this horrible, thrice recycled dead animals.
yeah. So we're going to start a Kickstarter 1111, and we're going to be doing a crowdfunding campaign to get, because the licensing is very expensive, and here in the United States, you have to get licensed in every single state individually, and they all have different standards, which is also bizarre. So that's going to help with that. That's 1111. It's coming up, and then yeah, and then we'll be able to ship where everywhere. I love that you brought up compost tea. I think a way to subvert traditional organic fertilizers is to make teas. You can also make a tea from weeds. You can pick a bunch of weeds, soak them in water, put the bubbler in there, and you can also throw in your fulvic acid, your humic acid, like you said, your molasses, right from the kitchen. And you can make a weed tea, comfrey, nettles, yarrow, aloe, all of those things make awesome fertilizers. So, and I think anything where people can be self-reliant, again, I mean, that's what
Mm-hmm.
home gardening is all about, right? Is being self-reliant. It's just kind of part of the whole nature of it. So you can definitely make your own fertilizers at home.
Mm. Now, I've never seen fulvic acid or humic acid at Home Depot. I don't think.
No, you would have to get those off the internet. Yeah.
And fulvic is FULVIC,
Hmm.
and humic is HUMIC.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And both things, those can be added to your composter. They can be added to your soil. Yeah.
Right.
And then
And
of course,
you don't need a lot, right? Because they're growing things that then reproduce, right? So you've got.
yeah, no, you don't need a lot. No, that's great. Yeah. And then the other great thing about natural fertilizers is you never burn the plant. The plant, it's like us taking vitamins. Our body figures out what we need. We just flush what we don't, because our
Mhm.
bodies know how to handle a little B12 or whatever. But, when you do a chemical thing, the body's like 14, 14, 14. I don't have no idea how to process this. And then you get that burn. And that says, this is chemical fertilizers. And then you get the runoff. That's one of the big problems is because the plants don't know how to use the stuff, it all just runs right off
Right.
because they can't
And so
store it.
killing off ponds and
Hmm.
lakes because, right, there's an algal bloom and then the oxygen gets sucked up and the fish all die and then they fall to the bottom and anaerobically decompose.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't be farming or gardening in a way that is killing the earth. We're trying to produce things from just counterintuitive, honestly.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about Cabbage Hill Fertilizer Company, which is and you said 1111, and that's 2023 because
Yeah.
this podcast has longevity, so people may hear this and want to know what year we're talking about.
Yeah.
So tell us about the company, where like assume people are going to be listening to this in a couple of months as well. Like
Yeah.
what's the hope about where they can find what you've got and how to use it?
I didn't know I was really going to be starting a movement. I didn't think I'd be doing all this research or speaking on the situation. I really just wanted an alternative fertilizer, which I had. I served my clients with that fertilizer. And over time, I was like, well, I just have to make sure this is available to everybody. Vegans and vegetarians don't even know their vegetables are grown in animal carcasses. It's so I wanted to make an alternative fertilizer. And then almost immediately I started getting shut down by the state licensing board about my fertilizer. Like immediately. I didn't even say anything. They could just somehow smell the gig was up. And so they blocked me from being able to license my fertilizer and sell it, which is crazy.
Hmm.
Like my thing that's super safe, has these 6 little organic natural inputs, not allowed. So I'm going to have to get legal help. And we thought, let's just start crowdfunding. That's going to be the easiest way, get the word out, and at the same time be able to push this fertilizer now through this government red tape. And, I want it to be sitting on shelves at every nursery because everyone deserves just an alternative. These other places are going to keep on running. We know that. But why not just have an animal-free alternative just to be safe and to keep pioneering new technologies in the direction of plant-based? We're already talking about that day and night, right, with the climate. Like, we need these climate technologies. Well, and sometimes those technologies don't move into weird new lands. Sometimes they go back to being like, well, let's just look at what we used to do and let's maybe take a look at, these vegetable inputs, and maybe we can figure out another way instead of rendering and recycling all these animals. Seems like, let's not put technology into there. Let's put technology into a plant-based fertilizer.
Yeah.
So we're going to do the crowdfunding. It's 1 month starting 11/11. And then I hope shortly thereafter, there'll be just a website and we'll absolutely be shipping from the website. We're going to do subscriber boxes and make it really fun for people. We have this very interesting new labeling because, nurseries are kind of snobby places. Gardening can be a little persnickety. And I wanted to have a really inclusive company because also during COVID, all these new plant parents came out, right? There's a whole new audience for gardening that really isn't being tapped into. And so I thought, let's get these people in and we're going to get this whole little plant-based movement going. So I'm hoping it's going to be in shelves, in a year's time.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, a couple of reflections. One is it's very common for regulatory bodies that are tasked with protecting the public to protect the public from the worst and the best.
That's so funny. That's true.
Right? And what was the second thing? I had another thing.
That's a good one. I never even heard that before.
Yeah, I've seen this in with home inspection, building inspection. The building's not going to fall down on your head, but if you try to build it with cob or have a gray water system, right? The people who are trained to evaluate it says, well, that's not up to code.
Yeah.
All right. So that's always going to be a process of education when you have something that's better than what the standards are.
Yeah. I know there was a point out here where they were telling people, you can't catch your own rainwater, it belongs to the state. And then during the drought, they're like, catch the rainwater. You're like, oh, which is it? Tell us what you want us to do here.
Yeah. I think the second thing, whatever it was, has escaped me. And if it's important, it'll come back.
That's right.
Anything I haven't asked about that you want to share?
Let's see. I feel that I did end up using a lot of animal fertilizer in my business. So, I kind of feel like I have blood meal on my hands. And I did a lot of school gardens, and to engage kids, I would talk about fertilizer. I mean, it's just part of the whole thing. And I would pretend that it was poop in there just to engage them, right? I'd be like, what do you think's in the fertilizer? And eventually they'd be like, manure, poo, ooh, gross. And I thought, they don't even know what's really in there. And I'm literally pouring it into kids' hands, because it's physical, right? They're physically gardening. And I thought, I don't really know what I'm doing here. So I felt a real moral responsibility to maybe right a wrong that I have made. And
Yeah.
it just sort of has kept me fired up for some reason.
Yeah. That reminds me of a lot of people who become vegan activists, right? Like none of us, grew up, very few of us grew up living according to our current understanding.
Yeah.
So I think it's a
Just
beautiful thing to be compassionate with our past selves, which allows us to be compassionate with the people who haven't caught up to us yet.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
remembered the other thing I was going to say, which is even for lots of vegans who kind of like we understand plant-based people understand that the animals get all of their nutrients from plants, right? That everything kind of comes from the earth and the sun. So that whatever the animals are the middlemen, right? And so like all the protein is amino acids from the plants and all the vitamins and all that stuff, everything that we can get from an animal originally. And you can argue about whether it's more bioavailable or more concentrated, but there's no question of the origin of all these nutrients. But when it comes to gardening, I think people still have a very hard time thinking that all the fertilizer has come from plants too, and that we can have green manures.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like when I was thinking about when I was really kind of like enamored for a while with like Polyface Farm and Joel Salatin and like really like doing the numbers. And I realized, and we had backyard chickens at one point. And I'm like taking all our kitchen compost and feeding the chickens, but I was also going to the feed store and buying big bags of chicken feed, which meant that somewhere on this earth was a field that was growing food for my chickens so that I could have better crops because the chicken manure soil was like really, really rich. And if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to, I could feed maybe one or two chickens with our kitchen scraps. It wouldn't work out. What I would need to do is like devote 30 to 70% of all my gardening space to crops that were going to then become manure for the crops that I wanted to grow. Right? Like animal, if you have the pasture for the animals that are going to make the manure you need for your garden, it's going to be like 100 to 1 animal space to plant space, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we're talking about, we can't ignore that it's just a capitalism model. To be in our world, which, in capitalism, you have to expand just to survive, you know, not that you want to
Yeah.
like be a billionaire, but if you're not expanding your business, you will not survive. If we take the capitalism out of it and then you work more on a community based situation where, yeah, I can't do this alone, but if Frank grows the hay and Martha grows the alfalfa and Tommy grows the goats and Junior grows the carrots, you could do it. You
Mm-hmm.
could do it. But we just don't have that model in our society, unfortunately. So, yeah, I
Mm.
mean, we all have to make sacrifices. Like the rock phosphate I use, the minerals I use in my fertilizer comes from mining. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to sit here and argue about the benefits of mining, but we're trying to feed ourselves. So it's a very shitty equation where that's why it's like imperative that we figure out a sustainable way to do it. Imperative. Because like you're saying, this constant expansion, it just makes us make sacrifices we don't want to make.
Yeah.
How are
Well,
we
and
going to?
the logical conclusion is the 1% get on spaceships to Mars, and you know,
Bye, boy.
good luck to them.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great. Let's just do that.
Yeah.
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 Let's send them all away. You said so many
Yeah.
good things. You brought up green manure too, which we didn't talk about with like growing your own fertilizer. The green manure is the cover crop. So you can
Mm.
grow cover crops like fava beans or any bean, any pea. You use a little inoculant on the seed. An inoculant is basically like what mycorrhiza is.
Yeah.
Inoculant creates life. Again, I'm not a scientist, so just trust me, it's called inoculant. And it helps grow bacteria on that bean or pea plant. And the bacteria is what is able to help plants fix nitrogen from the air. Because that nitrogen in the air isn't available to our gardens. We're dependent on the nitrogen. It's like a liquid nitrogen, basically, that can survive in the soil. But these other plants can pull the nitrogen from the air and bring it down into the soil. So if you grow those plants, add them to your composter, or even just lay them right in your garden bed, you're basically getting free nitrogen. So that's also another way to have your own fertilizer growing at home. I love green
Yeah,
manure.
yeah.
Yeah,
And you can get a bag of inoculant from, I don't know, Johnny Seeds or dozens
yeah,
of different places. And a
yeah,
lot of places will sell the seeds pre-inoculated.
yeah. That's true too. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So yeah, it's easier than it's ever been.
Yes, it should be. Definitely should
All right.
be.
So how can people, Erin, how can people stay in touch and follow you and get notified when your Kickstarter goes live? I didn't ask whether it's Kickstarter. Is it Kickstarter?
It is Kickstarter. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
How do people follow you?
yeah, Instagram's the best way. I love it. Cabbage Hill Fertilizer. So at Cabbage Hill Fertilizer, and of course, we're everywhere: LinkedIn, X, Facebook, YouTube, on all the things. So, but I think Instagram's a great place to start. We're on TikTok, all the things. So
All right.
yeah, and we're
Well,
gonna make a
Erin,
lot of videos. We're gonna bank like 40 videos over the next month, just deep diving into all these issues. So
wow. Well, you've opened my eyes to a whole bunch of stuff that I feel like I should have been aware of but wasn't. So, and it sounds like you had a similar experience. So I really appreciate you, taking the time to think this through, look it all up, and then most of all, like taking positive action so that the rest of us, once we're woken up, we don't just have to, engage in hand wringing. There's things we can actually do, whether it's, certainly supporting Cabbage Hill Fertilizer Company, but also thinking about ways that we can make our own communities more food resilient and sustainable. So cool.
yeah, and definitely, just keeping those labels of organic and compost meaning what we think they mean. There's an integrity there that we really all need to kind of have our eyes on.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
All right,
it was a
Erin
pleasure.
Riley. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything you're doing and everything you're teaching and everything you're standing for. So I wish you all the best. Keep me informed about the progress of the Kickstarter and when you have a website and when things are starting to move and ship. And I'd love to keep spreading the word.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate it. I hope we get to talk again.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Okay, have a good one.
Okay. You too. Bye.